It's important when you're using the discriminator that you go over the target with your coil in a couple of different directions. It may not completely blank in one direction, you come back over and it will completely blank. And this is happening because you're moving the target's relationship with the winding in the coil. The other control that affects discrimination is the level adjust. As you move that, it is measuring the magnetism generated by a target, which enables the machine to classify it as being either ferrous or non-ferrous.
With the control set in its most anti-clockwise position, the discriminator is cautious, only blanking out most ferrous items. Any doubtful targets are identified as being non-ferrous. As the control is turned further clockwise, the detector will blank out all ferrous objects, but could occasionally discriminate out doubtful targets. If the target doesn't completely blank out, dig it.
The key places I'd look for when using the SD2200 discriminator is the old campsites of the miners during the great alluvial rushes of the last century. Where they camped was the richest, and up to now we haven't been able to detect these areas. Now this discriminator will be able to blank out most of the ferrous targets, and what we're listening for is those clear signals, and that's where you're going to get the result. The audio boost on the 2200 is not a simple amplifier. It's actually got two settings, one shallow and one deep, and I'll just demonstrate how it works and how you'll pick up more gold. This is a deep target and I'm in normal. If I flick down to deep, pass the target over the coil in the same position, you'll hear how the background hasn't increased but the signal has. Now if we pick up this small piece of gold, you can see it's only a little tiny piece. I'll put the switch back to neutral. I'll pass the small piece of gold back over the coil at a constant height and you'll note the very faint signal. We're just picking it up. Now if I flick that into shallow and go through the procedure, let's note the difference. Almost knock your socks off. But be careful, only use this in shallow ground. It's what it's designed for. And if you're in very deep ground, where obviously you're going to miss your very tiny pieces of gold, but you're looking for those deep targets, just work the machine in the deep position. The final control we have to talk about on the SD2200 is the level adjust. This is the most misunderstood control on the detector, and I would just like to recap on a couple of points as we've discussed it before.
This control has a dual purpose. It controls the signal strength required to pause the tracking mode. It determines the magnetic level required to identify a target as being either ferrous or non-ferrous.
To look at them together, we could illustrate it in this way.
If we have the discrimination working while searching, the level adjust knob affects both the automatic ground balance pause function as well as discrimination. If you start with a control in its most anti-clockwise position, the ground balance is going to be working at its optimum level. In this position, the discriminator is in its most cautious position. As the control is turned further clockwise, the ground balance will pause on more signals, and the discriminator will work to a greater depth, identifying more targets as being ferrous.
Therefore, if you're using the variable adjust in extremely mineralised ground, you only use the first half of the control. What we're demonstrating here is the correct coil sweep. You should keep, as we've already said, keep the coil on the ground, but you should overlap your sweeps. And what we're trying to do is move through and see if we can locate a target. Right, I've just got a faint, just picking up a faint target. I come off the target, put the digger down, and to get that fixed ground, average ground balance, I'm still moving around the target in tracking. It seems to be settled in, then flick down to fixed. Now I'm ready to go in and search for that, hopefully, little piece of gold. So it's just at first just a matter of coming over and centering your coil where you're getting the most intense signal. The first thing I do is just scrape the area with the side of my boot. At this stage, back over the target area. Again, I can hear the target, more defined target centre now. I can use the boot again. Now, it's obviously not a bit of surface trash because we would have kicked it away, so it's an interesting target. Now we need the digger. First thing I do is a couple of divots. And what you're trying to do is create a hole that doesn't have sharp edges. You're trying to get a nice even hole with a dished out effect in the hole. Again, I can centre the target. Now I know I've got a target. I usually put the detector down, unclip my ocky strap. I know where the target is now. I don't want to damage that target. So with the digger, I simply go around the outside of the target area. And I'm not going to damage the nugget by doing that. And then with the broader end, again, just sweep it to the side. Put the digger out of range of the coil, because once you swing over, you're going to get you've got to really put it out of field. And then again, with your hand on the stem, back through the hole, and you can hear that. We can hear the signal quite distinctly. I know where it is. Back to the pick, and I can lay into it a bit more now. Again, keep to the edges, a simple scooping out. Pick up the shaft, the digger out of range. Listen to that. Nice and central. We're getting closer because the intensity of the signal is increased. Pick up the coil again. Right, there's no signal in the hole. Now, this is where a lot of people go wrong. The detector, we've got to use the detector as our eyes. So what I do with the spoils heap, I know the target's not in the hole, it's actually in the spoils heap. So what I do, go over the heap. Right, I've centered where the target is in the heap. Simply bend down with the hand that's got no jewellery on it, obviously, and you just simply pick up, don't even look at it. Back over the heap, haven't got it in my hand obviously, back in the hole, another scoop. I go over the spoils and there's no target, it must be in my hand. Immediately I put the coil down on the ground, flatten it out, and I half hand it. I don't look. Again, go over the coil, dribble the material on. In the first sweep, usually you pick it up. It's not in there, I discard that. Back into the hand. Hear that? Nice distinct little ping. Half hand again. It's rising. Not in that one, back in the hole. When I've reduced it down, I'm not again looking for the target. I simply dribble the material onto the disc. Did you hear that little ping? Then what you do, I've got it. There's an imaginary line going through the double D coil, and all I do is pass the material across that line. Whoa, hear that? So I know everything's this side, all that material I can discard. And there it is. exactly what we're looking for, a beautiful piece of gold. Now the thing is, if you can find a little piece of gold, the big ones will look after themselves. And I reckon if you get out there with your SD, you'll have as much fun as I've had and going to have. Well, we've been successful in finding our little bit of gold, but the most important thing is that we leave the bush as we found it, and that means filling in our hole. I hope you enjoyed the video and got something out of it, and I'll see you in the goldfields on our next trip.